Okay. All right. Abie, how's it going, man?
It's going well. Thanks for having me, Sean.
Right on. Thanks for taking time for, getting together with me and pophorror.com. I'm with AB, the writer director of Cram. And I gotta say, I, get- I took a double take the same night I watched it. I was already up to like 12:30 my time watching screening Cram. And I was like, I looked down, I was like, I didn't take any notes. Like, I have to watch this again. so, very awesome, dude. Very thought provoking piece. Yeah. What were some of the things that you were trying to convey with Cram?
Totally. Thanks, man. I just also want to say, we're recording this after you published a really beautiful review in Pop Horror that really touched me. The best thing about making this movie, I mean, the movie really started because school was a nightmare for me growing up. And I, wanted to exercise those academic demons. And I've said this in other interviews, but the best thing about making movies is they're not made alone. And all of the amazing artists that made Cram with me, good students, bad students alike, we all share these nightmares. And this desire to interrogate the question of like, why is school universally scary, particularly when so many of us want to learn and like learning, was really the impetus for the movie. But the coolest thing has been, as we share the movie, so many people have responded really personally. And I think that sense of that nightmare being universal in one sense is really horrible because it sucks that everyone's afraid of school. But on the other hand, it's really
Yeah.
wonderful that we've been able to kind of offer people an avenue to talk about some of this stuff. Because I think the strange thing is that fear of school is so often lonely and isolating, and yet is something everyone is experiencing. Not that this movie is like a message movie or anything, and I certainly don't intend for it to be, but I do think that the fact that people are walking away able to talk about something that feels personal is really moving to me. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That was it's exactly what I got, when I received from it, because when I was, screening, it was hard not to feel this message, which we were talking a little bit before about how sometimes like interpreting art and trying to describe it can sometimes be arbitrary, but I'm like, well, that's what I'm tasked to do, so how can I help with the readers. So and I'm not really an academic, like I didn't make it too far, to be honest, but like when I started learning about Mark, main character in Cram, um I was like, oh yep, I've thought like that. Yep, I felt like that. Ooh, yeah, like, and you just, I think it was the Austin Film Festival
Yeah.
interview. I was reading, you had mentioned that like using this like medium of horror, it really like fundamentally exercises these ideas, thoughts, and emotions. And like, dude, that's why I'm a fan. Like I'm like, dude, I get Mark. I've been where he's been. He was fun to write about in the review. And I was also, I was like, man, am I taking like personal inventory right now? Like,
I mean,
yeah,
thank you. I think that's wonderful. And it's really true because like horror movies, I think are just naturally going to be some of the more honest movies out there, whatever they're about. Because at the end of the day, if you're trying to scare an audience, then the only benchmark you have is what is scary to you.
mhm,
And I think that, when I'm making a movie about the fear of school, the fears that I'm exploring are my own and the fears of my collaborators. And the cool thing about working in the horror genre is you get to take these things that are existential and literalize them. And so, we all talk about college or about higher education in this country as this like vampiric force.
mhm,
It sucks the lifeblood out of kids. And in fact, it's vampiric in the sense that it like seduces those kids into voluntarily offering up their necks. And so we all, everybody agrees on that. And it's not that big of a jump then to say like, well, then what if school were literally a vampire?
yeah, no, yeah, that was a fun ride. So, another thing that I found was like, dude, the cinematography captured by, I believe it was Felix,
Yeah.
and also, part-time engineer sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like, man, some of those shots, like, how did he get the over the head hinge drop in like that, and in such a small space?
Totally. Thank you for asking about the cinematography and that shot in particular. Felix Hanta, the DP on Cram, he and I went to high school together, and we co-founded the production company that made this movie, Red Rhino, Radical Rhinoceros Pictures. And Felix and I have been making movies together for over a decade. And both of us were not the strongest students, but we went to this very rigorous math science high school. And so there was this strange dissonance all the time where, at once part of society was telling us that we were intelligent, but then that same institution was constantly telling us that we weren't good enough. And that really bonded me and Felix always. And I think we've always had a bone to pick and something to prove maybe. But as far as the actual, image making in this movie, Felix is, like you said, he's an engineer as well. And he takes a very deliberate technical approach to everything we're doing. And I really think of him sometimes as like my other half from a filmmaking perspective. He's there from the writing of the script. We're developing story together. We shot list and storyboard together. And on Cram, we also, my co-editor, Trevor Wallace, was there from the beginning. And, everyone always interviews me and I've become like the voice of the movie, but movie making, it's not something that's done alone at all. It takes a lot of people to make a movie, and Felix has an incredible eye, an incredible technical pedigree. And I tweeted about this the other day and I saw you liked it, but that shot, there's a shot early on in the movie where the camera kind of transitions, the language of the camera transitions from a sort of conventional eye level coverage to something a little more ominous, a little more disjointed from Mark. The camera is almost haunting Mark. It takes on the perspective, I would say, of the antagonist in the movie. And to mark that transition, no pun intended, we wanted a really kind of dynamic shift. And, one of the dangers of your cinematographer being an executive producer on your movie is if I go to Felix and I say, okay, I think we need the camera to, do this full 180-degree flip over Mark's head while it's pushing in. And he, an ordinary producer would say, you want a whole custom rig for one shot? No. But Felix, because he's also the producer, he's like, let's do it.
Yeah.
So he built a trebuchet basically out of lumber, and it had to be assembled on set, and it took forever, and it wobbled like hell. And it was actually, which I tweeted about that too, but I think there's something really cool about custom rigs, and in general when you're making indie movies, your language, you can either fight against your constraints or you can embrace them. And we don't have a techno crane. We don't have the ability to execute these like perfectly robotically stabilized camera moves. And rather than, we tried to make it as smooth as possible, we knew it was going to wobble. And so when we got the take we liked from a performance perspective, from a technical perspective, when we turned the shot, in the edit, when we turned it over to our composer, Dan Rudin, who I think is an absolute hero and one of my closest collaborators since making Cram, we said, don't try to run away from what the camera's doing here, ride that wave. And he, wrote a piece of music that really kind of rode the wobble of the camera and makes it feel very intentional. And I think just the ability to embrace that really speaks to how Cram was made overall. We're all like playing with the toys we had to build and cobble together. And it's all just this real work of scrappy love.
Man, yeah, I really admire that. You just hearing writers and directors talking about playing with their toys. I just like that's just got to be a dream.
It's so funny because you write, and obviously you're a painter and your beautiful work is behind you. But as a writer, you're welcome. Something I complain about all the time is like writers don't have good toys. Like, it's so fun to be a director because I have all this amazing gear to play with. But then when I'm writing, I'm like, I have a mechanical keyboard that I really like, but I'm like, should I get into typewriters or something? I don't know. Toys are helpful.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, and so I wanted to express my condolences. I heard about Gary, and I know you don't want to talk about it, but I think he left us loving, doing what he loved to do. So
that's right.
What else can you tell us about Goopert too, by the way?
Yeah, totally. So Gary and his brother Goopert. So there's a scene in Cram where we have a mechanical puppet character. It's a little baby bird. And there were two of them. Gary was Goopert's stunt double. So it was an amazing collaboration between some of the key people on the movie. Our production designer, Sydney Emanuel, and John Hanford, who wore several hats. He was sometimes our gaffer. And then in the case of Goopert, he, designed and constructed an armature, like an inside skeleton for the puppetry of this character. That then Sydney built a skin around and, made look like a little baby bird. And so, you know, I've been a Jim Henson fan forever. I live in Astoria,
Yeah.
Queens, right near the Museum of the Moving Image, where they have a huge collection of Jim Henson stuff. And sometimes
So
just
rad.
it's amazing. And for inspiration, I can just walk over there and, you know, walk around and see all these puppets. And I think that puppets are amazing. I've always loved them. But what I love so much about a puppet is, you know immediately when you're looking at it that it's not real. And yet at the same time, you know that it's tangible. Like, you know that it's something that can be touched. You know, when Mark is holding this puppet in his hand, you as an audience member know 100% that is something in Mark's hand, which is not, you know, if we had a photo real CG character, and for what it's worth, there are invisible visual effects all over Cram, and I love CG. But I think that in the case of a little character like that, there's something about just the tangibility of it for the actor too, for John's performance that really lends itself to that. So I knew I wanted it to be a puppet. And I thought for fantasy, just there's this language, you know, I love the Dark Crystal, I love Labyrinth. I think there's just something about like freaky little puppet characters that speaks to me. Maybe I shouldn't interrogate it too much.
But yeah, he said it sounded awesome too. The whole scene, you know, we were in correspondence a little bit,
Yes.
and I had my AirPods in. My wife's asleep. I'm screaming. I'm like, oh my gosh, like this. I'm like, can she hear? Because I can feel these vibrations. It felt like.
Totally. Oh my God. Daniela Hart, our sound designer, is amazing. You know, she's a musician in her own right as well. And I think that we really talked a lot about the degree to which the Cram soundscape would be musical, and Dan and Daniela both worked closely together. But Daniela, you know, for Goopert, which he's not credited with that name, but that's what we call him.
Yeah, no, I dig it.
Yeah. For that character and for that scene, there's so much going on. There's a movie within the movie playing, and you know, Daniela had to do the sound for that, while there's Dan's score and there's the sound effects of everything going on in the scene. So it's a really dense soundscape, which is always intimidating because you don't want it to become muddy, and you don't want, you know, any one thing to take priority over the other, and you need this little baby bird to really come through. And it was really a combination of amazing sound design that Daniela did, and then John. I remember the night before we shot that, I was like, I went up to him and I asked him, I said, you know, are you nervous about kind of playing, you know, spoilers, but John kind of has to lean into that birdness in some way.
Yeah.
And I said, how are you feeling about that? You know, we can always like ADR or post sound some of that stuff. And he's like, I've been watching all of these videos, man. I've got it. And I said, oh, do you want to show me? And he said, no, we'll wait till tomorrow. I said, okay. And then he shows up on set and he just starts screeching. And it's the most like terrifying sound I've ever heard in my life. And I think Daniela actually used a lot of his noises, his vocalizations for the character.
Yeah, it was definitely disturbing, but he crushed it for sure.
Yeah, totally. He's a hero. We gave him at our wrap party, we like gave out degrees that we had printed up for people. And John got a degree in being down because he was down for anything.
That's awesome. Yeah, dude, I really, really liked the character Mark too. Took me on some rides. One of the most that really stuck with me, where I thought about it even the next day, was I don't want to give away too much. There's a sequence where he meets somebody, and there's a conversation, and but it's character with Libra, and there's like this moment where he gets like they have a hug, right?
Yeah,
He embraces a hug, and Mark has an expression where he hasn't like been hugged in quite some time. And I'm like, man, is he not, with all the stuff he has going on, all this inner turmoil, is this character like feel lovable? What does Mark feel and like that, you know, in what he's in?
Ah, dude, thank you for that. Like pointing out that moment. It's one of my favorite moments in the movie. And it's, you know, it's all John, and of course Jane Bradley, who plays Libra. These actors are just, you know, feeding each other. And John spends so much of this movie by himself, where his only scene partner is the space around him, and that's really hard. And you know, it's a real testament to his performance that the audience is so easily able to like track his thought process. And you know, when we were casting that part, that was my number one priority. I was like, this character is going to be alone for the whole movie. I need to see his thoughts. And I remember in John's callback, we were in, you know, a little black box theater type space, and there was a bookshelf, and he like immediately he just grabbed props, and he like started collecting things around him for his audition, just so that he had material to like help channel his thoughts. And I saw everything he was thinking, and I just knew it was going to be him pretty early on because he had that quality. But then I think it's not easy. And so when he finally had the opportunity to do scenes with other people, he always was just so excited and so, you know, happy. And I think Jane saw that, and you know, Libra, her character, is pretty predatory in some ways. And I think that leaning into the sort of predation on Mark's vulnerability in that moment was, obviously like fiction, but there was a real thing of like John really needed a hug too. He'd been alone for a long time. And
Okay. Yeah.
So I just think something really real happened in that moment. And when we shot listed that scene, we had shot listed it with fewer cuts and with a little less coverage. And when I was working with Trevor, my co-editor, the first pass of that scene was kind of more in line with what we'd planned. But in the wide shots, that there was a different performance, because it was not that first time that he'd had the hug, which was in what's in the movie. And I remember I said to Trevor, I was like, we got to throw out the shot list here, because John gave an unbelievable performance in the close-ups, and I'd rather lose our perfect shot design and find this performance, because I think it's one of the most human moments in the movie.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it was very well illustrated. I'm glad you guys kept that. So yeah, and I have to talk about the Bookmaster's performance too, Brandon.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Guy crushed it. I'm not a big Shakespearean, but I was tracking and following with him. I was like, man, this guy is just crushing it. And then into, don't want to give away too much, of course. But when he's just hammering down on Mark, right? And then he's like, all right, I'm over. I give up. Even, backtracking to when I was mentioning I'm not much of an academic, but I've been through the trades. I'm like, what am I doing here? I'm like, it's that mindless rut, that nihilistic replay over and over again. It's Monday through Sunday. Now I'm back here again. And it's I just give up. What do you want me to do? He reminded me of so many foremen I've had on construction sites.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting, because I do think that I've met a lot of teachers in my life who I think hate children. I think I've had so many wonderful teachers in my life, truly. Mm-hmm. And I think that, I wouldn't have made it where I am without some of them. But sometimes there are people out there who are just in positions of power because they get power. And, children are vulnerable, and it's easy to feel powerful when you've got a room full of kids you can command. And I think that The Master of the Books is just that dialed way up. And, like I said earlier, the opportunity to literalize the vampiric nature of the Academy was something we were excited about. But as soon as we started characterizing that figure, I thought about all the ways that that character is also sort of a victim of this system. I think that something Brandon layers into that performance is just a lot of pain as well. People who are causing harm to others are almost always in pain themselves. And he's quite monstrous. But I think that, there's a moment very late in the movie where Mark concludes his journey, for better or worse, and the Master of the Books, I think, watches him go. And I think that there's something really sad in that moment. But Brandon is just, on another level. And you mentioned that you're not the biggest Shakespeare person. And I think that a lot of people share that position.
Sure.
And I also think when someone's tuning in to watch a little horror movie, they're not expecting verse. So it's a big ask. And I do remember that, when we had the idea that he would speak in verse, which was really as simple as, this is a character who hoards knowledge, who, I wanted him to sort of, in his language, represent the sort of control that he exerts over knowledge itself in the library. And verse is so ordered and structured. And something that Brandon has taught me, because he's an incredible Shakespeare actor, and we've been friends for a long time, is the ways that verse isn't just what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. And the rhythm of the words can become violent in its own way. And you can kind of end a phrase a certain way, and it feels violent, no matter what you're saying. And Brandon, because we knew, I wrote the part with him in mind, and I was able to bring him on, well before shooting, to work on the script with me. And those scenes, I would, do a draft, and Brandon would then tell me it really needs to be this, just for the rhythm, for the mouthfeel of it. And he would be able to, so that perspective was really crucial. And I think that's a big reason why, whether you like Shakespeare or not, you're able to understand what that character is saying. And, if you ever watch a great Shakespeare performance, the language is, it can go way over your head, but you'll know what they're talking about,
Exactly. Yeah, I
That's
think I've
really
had some of
cool.
that experiences in like Game of Thrones.
Yeah, totally, exactly. Great acting is
I
great acting, you know.
yeah, I probably made it like several seasons. I'm like, I still don't know that guy's name, but like that guy's my favorite.
Yeah, totally. And like, not even to mention that Brandon is doing all of this behind layers of prosthetics
Right.
and fake teeth. And, you know, for what it's worth, there's like a big kind of creative leap there too, which is this character he's playing is an ancient white man and he's a young black man. And there's like a ton of racial dynamics to navigate there.
Sure.
And we were always really interested in just kind of leaning into all of that and going, you know, big swing was the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard you make some comparisons. I'm not one to really compare, people's art forms,
Sure.
but I did pick up on some of like the like dreamlike sequences from Elm Street you were touching on. It did feel a little bit, especially with the education program, like coming from like students and teachers to like Candyman esque.
Hmm.
Um, so this horror medium that you're in, like, do you want to express more like ideas, thoughts, and emotions from different perspectives going forward, or what would you want like to do next with these?
Thanks, man. It's a great question. And I feel like, you know, call me out if you feel like this sounds like a cop out,
Go
but
for it.
my feeling is that like life is very frequently scary and life is very frequently funny and life is romantic and dramatic. And I really do want my movies to feel like life in all of its ways. And, I can't imagine that I would ever make a movie that doesn't have horror in it in some way because life has horror in it. But I don't necessarily know that everything I make is going to be like in the horror genre. But yeah, fear is present, and I'm really interested in exploring it.
Yeah, yeah, you never know what's really going to strike you a certain way, and things that stick with me, and I can always like navigate that by the feelings if I'm processing them the next day. Still, I'm like, I wasn't sure how I felt after that, and then if I'm thinking about the next day, like, wow, there's really something to unpack with that. Like, what else has this writer done?
Yeah, totally, exactly. And that's the thing is like over the course of, as you sort of continue with your body of work, I don't think I could go from the top down and say this is the type of story I'm interested in. I think it's going to emerge, and I've been writing what I hope would be my next movie for like 6 months, actually for like 3 years, but actively for 6 months now. And it's a romance, kind of first and foremost, but it's also like a twisted corporate satire and pretty violent and scary in some ways. And I think that as I've been working on that, and actually after Cram, Dan, the composer of the score, invited me to write an original musical with him. And I did that. And kind of across all of these stories lately, over the last 5 years, I would say, I've noticed there is a common thread. And the common thread is really what I'm interested in is stories about people who are, yearning for something beyond themselves in a world that I think makes it very difficult to experience transcendence. And the movies, whether the characters kind of succeed or don't, something I loved in your review, by the way, that I think no one's really articulated so well is you really got at what I was trying to get at in Cram about success, about this feeling that like, okay, you make it, and do you have it, like whatever it is, like
Right.
and I think that whether that's school or whatever, so much of life is this feeling of like you're like following some path towards something, but then when you get there, will you even know it? And also, if you do know it, like, will it actually be what you need? And that's why, for me, it's not about, this is platitudinous, forgive me, but like the product is the process, man, like
Hmm. Yeah,
the
absolutely.
yeah.
My wife and I, we talk about that quite a bit because we don't have like much like religious backgrounds by any
Mhm.
stretch of the imagination. However, but like we have like some spiritual like things we kind of hold dear, and like success is a big one. Like dude, it's an inside job. You know what I mean? Like
Totally.
we keep on coming up. Oh, we crush it this year. We crush it this year. Kids are crushing it. Like dang, and it's like but they're still stressors, and we can call them quality problems, but they're still problems. And it's like, am I in a drama movie because it was hilarious this morning, and then some real stuff hit the fan,
Yeah.
and then there's somebody who's kind of struggling, making maybe a minimum wage job, getting by, but is the most content person in the room, and then their skin just fits, and you're like, dude, that's it,
Yeah, totally. And
absolutely.
that's, I'm really trying to, with the movies, like I just want to kind of create a space for people to feel that themselves. You don't need to like
Hmm.
talk to me about it. I don't need to know, but I just hope that like if you leave a movie that I've made, I want you to feel like you have been given the keys to a door inside yourself, the ability to
Hmm.
look at something that maybe you were afraid to look at before. That's the amazing thing about horror. To be honest, I was not like the biggest horror fan growing up, mostly because I was too afraid. I just like couldn't
Yeah.
handle watching them. And I actually, this is going to sound a little ironic given the movie, but I took a class in college. It was called Sex, Gender, and Politics in the American Horror Film, and we watched 4 horror movies a week. And by the end of that class, I'd seen hundreds of horror films,
That's
and
awesome.
it was amazing. It was an amazing experience, and I came out of that with a completely shifted perspective, as well as like being pretty desensitized. And now nothing scares me. But uh, what I
That's how.
realized, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, no, I was just, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it's just, I feel the same way. I mean, I've started, I grew up a grandma's boy. So like there was no, I wrote about it somewhere else in another review, and that's like a euphemism nowadays for like, there was just no supervision. So I get to watch
Yeah.
everything, totally desensitized. And you're like, oh yeah, dude, like punk rock, metal, whatever. Like I can handle it all. And then you become a parent. And then I watched some Finnish horror movie. No, it was Danish. Uh, whoa, like just blew me away. And I was like,
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know. I didn't know that was there. You know what I mean? Like,
totally,
I need to
totally.
process that. Yeah, for sure.
I think we have like dark corners in our minds where we don't like, we keep
Yeah.
things, we don't like to look at them. And the beautiful thing about making art is it's a call to look at the things you don't want to look at the things you're afraid of. And that's what that horror class gave me, was all these things. There's like a 5-year-old that lives inside all of us that's terrified of watching a horror movie because it thinks it's real. But at the same time, there's also like a not 5-year-old who knows that it isn't real. And if you can like hold space for both of those beings inside of you, then I think you can sit in the movie and feel that fear and look at it. And I'm not saying that you have to like expose yourself to violence or whatever, like if something makes you uncomfortable, like please shut your eyes, walk away, whatever. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that there is a tremendous amount of value in feeling fear and not turning away from it, but instead looking at it. And I think there's a lot of, yeah, I don't know, you can learn a lot when you do that. I've learned a lot when I've done that. And Cram was a huge experience in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the ride that, you gave us with Cram. That's stuff like Cram is the stuff that I fell in love with movies about. I really don't. That's the best way I simulate my mind. It's how I decompress my day. It's how I get to interrogate, like, what's going on or how things make me feel. It's been a long time, like numbing stuff like that, and now it's time to like let's get on with it. Like and creative, writing and cinematography and taking a look at things that people aren't talking about as much, and just really illustrating it. It's just I feel like there's so much creative stuff coming out more than ever, especially with like episodic television.
Totally.
I think the writing's just getting amazing.
It's really true. And, part of that is driven by the fact that like a movie like Cram, which, as you mentioned in your review, is only 45 minutes long, is unconventional in that way. And traditionally, there wasn't really a distribution model for a movie like that. And there wouldn't really be an incentive to make a movie like that. And, when we made it, we were definitely taking a chance. I don't think that 3 years ago when we set out to make this movie, I expected to be here right now, about to share the movie with people in this way. So I'm tremendously grateful to the folks at Terror Films who took a chance on us, but I'm also just grateful to the audiences who've responded and like never even mentioned the runtime really,
Yeah.
other than like, oh, cool, that was so great that it only took 45 minutes. Because I think people are kind of sick of longer movies, though I do like them. But I think that what I mean to say is that the landscape has developed to accommodate risk taking in this way. Cram's going to be available on a platform like Tubi, which is free to watch, and so you can take a chance on a movie like Cram, and it doesn't cost you anything. And that means that Tubi is creating space for filmmakers to take risks. So the types of movies, I think, obviously there's so much stuff, but there is really amazing risky art being made, and I think that's so exciting. And yeah, I hope that people it's like you're saying, you know, I'm really fascinated by what you're saying about how turning to movies not to like numb your brain or turn off, but to like stimulate yourself and finding like a relaxation, a different kind of relaxation in that.
Yeah.
That really speaks to me. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, I just want to dull my mind and like watch nothing. And then I watch something bad and I feel bad, you know? And
well, yeah, it's that same as art imitates life, you know?
yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. I forgot to ask, like, so
Yeah.
how long did you sit on Cram for? How long did you have the story, in the process of writing?
It was a really unconventional process. I think it's almost 4 years ago that I first came up with the idea for the movie. And then it took us, 6 or 7 months to get to production from that point. But at that point, I'll be honest, Cram like was a short film. And the script was shorter. And we filmed half the movie right before the pandemic hit. And then we had to shut down production for 9 months. And during that time,
right.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah.
And during that 9 month period, we didn't know if we'd ever get to finish. That was like a really dark time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Trevor and I, who, we began editing the footage we had, and we just left, huge gaps in the movie, put like a little card that said party scene will go here, and we were able to really experiment. And as we did that, we saw what we actually had in front of us rather than the movie that existed in our minds. And, ordinarily, I've said this before, but it's so true. The hardest thing about making movies, I think, is that you learn all these lessons and you really become an expert in making that movie, and then you never make that movie again. So like by the end of making Cram, I'm the best in the world at making Cram, but I never get to make Cram again. But because of this 9 month hiatus, we like learned all these lessons from the first block of shooting, and then were able to apply them when we began shooting again. So it felt like we had dramatically leveled up as filmmakers when we like went to finish the movie. And I think that experience, allowed us to really see what the movie could be. And I remember when I finally, rewrote everything during that 9 month break and found that it was around a 45-page script, we had a lot of big conversations of like, are we dead in the water? Is this a viable runtime? Will anyone care? And we just asked ourselves, well, would it be better if we shaved off 15 minutes? And would it be better if we added 20? And the answer to both of those questions was no. And I just felt really strongly that if I was guided by what was best for the story, then there would be an audience for it and the audience would respond. And I've held true to that. And so far that's been working out. So, I don't know.
Yeah, man. I think you're really onto something. It's like there needs to be another title between, like, it's a medium film.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. And there's no reason. I mean, like, there's no god of movies that says your movie must be 90 plus minutes.
Right. Yeah. I feel like Netflix like creates a new genre of happy dramas. Like what happened?
Yeah, like there should be like featurettes, medium length movies. I think
absolutely.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I want to make my 2.5 hour epic, but I think there should just be space for people to tell their stories. And I think that so many movies feel the same because you're forcing them into these boxes where if storytellers were encouraged to, tell the story with what was best for the story in mind, I think stories might be better for that. But, I get it. It is harder with a medium length movie. So.
Yeah. So that was probably one of the biggest challenges was probably COVID, obviously then, huh? That probably
totally. COVID was huge. I mean, kudos to our producer, Zach Bailey, who, led the heroic charge in making sure we could safely finish the movie, in a world that was pre-vaccine at the time. I haven't done this enough. I want to shout out my partner is a nurse, and she actually began as a nurse in March of 2020. And which is insane in New York City. And so
nightmare,
true nightmare experience.
Wow.
So she's, like an actual hero. And I think selfishly being home and sitting there saying like, oh, am I ever going to finish my movie? Like, I actually think it was so humbling. Every day she's going into work during the height of this pandemic at a point when everyone's literally dying. And it really just helped me realize, like, yes, what I'm doing really matters to me. Yes, there will be people that this movie speaks to, but what she's doing is like capital I important. And it just made me take it a little easier as an artist, And that's a lesson that I've held very dearly. And I think that something that indie filmmakers sometimes say that I had no longer really vibe with is just that, like, it has to be your whole life, or I'm like, no, your life is your life. Like, you need space for love and people and friends and family. And Cram has taken almost 4 years of my life. Like, that's 4 years of my life, you know. Like, if it was only Cram, then I'd be in trouble.
Well, something for, it can be a badge of honor, man, because that the pandemic essentially killed like a lot of big motion pictures too. And for an indie film to persevere through all that, it was supposed to happen.
Thank you. Yeah, I really do appreciate that. And again, like, so many tremendous artists made this movie. It's a real like community of practice, I think. One of my biggest things, I'm just trying to like cultivate community through making movies, because not only can I not do it alone, I have no interest in doing it alone. Like, even if I could make a movie alone in my room, that's just not interesting to me. I think the movies are better because I surround myself with people who challenge me, who are, smarter than me in some ways and more inspiring in others, and have skills that I could never have. And a movie is always going to be greater than the sum of its parts for that reason. And yeah, I think that, anyone watching Cram, I have the same feeling of like this experience. I try to leave space in the movie for the audience to project their own experience onto it. David Lynch calls it room to dream, which like really speaks. Yeah, I love that so much. And I really want the movie to have room to dream, because I think that people are going to bring their own stuff, whether or not I leave space for it. And if I do leave space for it, then my hope is that you can have an experience like yours,
Absolutely. Well, I think you hit the mark, dude. Definitely.
Thank you so much. It really means the world.
Yeah, man. Thank you for giving me your time, and for Pop Horror, and the kind words about the review. I greatly appreciate it.
Of course. And thanks to Pop Horror, and thanks to anyone out there, by the way, who watches Cram. We never thought we'd be here, like I said, and it's an absolute gift to share the movie with everyone. Comes out on
March that comes 17th. Out the 17th.
That's right, March 17th.
What's the countdown? What's the dates?
It's 9 days away. It's crazy.
9 days.
Wild.
On digital on demand.
On demand. Tubi, free to watch. If you want to give us more money, though, you can rent it on Amazon or something. So
yeah, let's do it.
Oh yeah, man. Look, anytime, by the way, I'm really happy to chat with people who like really get the movie, and
I appreciate you, Abie. Thank you so much, man. It means a lot. Thank you so much.